and look forward to its progress through the House.
The question is that the motion... Oh, Dr Shane Retty.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It's a pleasure to take the last call on this excellent bill, and I'd like to also congratulate the Health Select Committee for working this through, and the member Chris Bishop for working so hard at what became quite a substantive rewrite. Mr Speaker, as this came to Select Committee, there were three major groupings that we were interested in: the policy intent, income replacement and cost reimbursement. The questions we were asking as it came to Select Committee around the policy intent were, should the narrative change from remove barriers to live organ donation to cost neutrality? Eligibility for income replacement and cost reimbursement, would that apply if people don't actually proceed to donation? Should time off work for the recuperating donor be covered? Should there be income replacement and cost reimbursement for overseas donors? And what about beneficiaries who also have income? We're also interested in asking questions around the types of transplant covered, because kidney and liver were certainly in the scope of this bill, but the bone marrow transplant is also very common and was also covered under a funding mechanism that we were considering. Income replacement, this was the second major area that we were interested in Select Committee. We were interested in whether we would change from 80% initially to 100% of income replacement. What was presented to us was information showing that, in fact, the coverage under the current arrangement, current income assistance for recuperating live organ donors, is actually only between 27% to 66%. So we knew that if we were starting at 80%, we were above what we're doing anyway. There was also the question of the cap, which was a reimbursement at up to a maximum of $120,000. Under the cost reimbursement, this was currently covered under the National Transport Assistance Policy, and WINS covered some childcare components. And some of the issues we're interested in there was a suggestion that maybe the cover under both of those schemes was partial, not full anyway. Certainly the NTA covered travel and accommodation, childcare and prescriptions, but what was not covered seemed to be parking and maybe international phone calls for international donors. So these were the questions we were interested in as we went into Select Committee. In Select Committee, we had 110 submissions, 14 oral, including the Royal Australian College of Physicians, Kidney Health New Zealand, the National Renal Advisory Board, and the Live Kidney Donation Aotearoa. The themes that came through those submissions included wide support for the bill. The risk to donors was real, but remote, and so some submitters said that donors should actually be prioritised into the health system if at some later date they subsequently develop a health issue. Now, we looked at this very closely, and it was considered that the risks were quite remote and that would really significantly distort the prioritisation system within the health system. Income replacement, well, at least half, nearly half anyway, said the level of replacement should go from 80% to 100%. And in fact, the Royal Australasian College of Physicians said that low-income donors are particularly vulnerable to a loss of income, and they are aware of many cases where donors delay making a donation to coincide with the Christmas break so that there was no income disadvantage. Cost reimbursement, there was support for widening the cost base, both in eligibility and administration. So subsequent to those submissions, we landed and made some conclusions on these three major areas. First was that the policy intent, the principle to the policy intent, needed to remain cost neutrality. Secondly, when we looked at income replacement, it was increased to 100%. And the reasons for that were it was thought to be totally consistent with that principle, with cost neutrality, and because it has a different policy intent and purpose to, say, ACC or other social assistance funding, which had set the 80% level in the first place. I think what also made it viable was that it had a well-defined time frame of 12 weeks, thus quite different to ACC and other social assistance funding as well. The cap was removed. Again, this is consistent with a difference to ACC with a 12-week maximum. And the evidence we had from the UK, where they don't have a cap, was that there'd been no substantial fiscal blowouts as a consequence of that. The final category, cost reimbursement, there'll be full cover of actual and reasonable travel and accommodation, and also cover of costs during the workup stage. That took us through the conclusions, and then there was really the difficult piece of work of how do we implement that policy, because a large number of agencies interface with the mechanics of actually implementing the policy, and that came out as a whole second departmental report, report number 2. If we look at those conclusions, the implementation stage looked to maintain cost neutrality. Income replacement, the figure of 100% was written into the bill, was written in on a gross basis, as taxable income, and as I said, the cap was removed. What we did do, though, for the cost reimbursement, that was not written into the bill. Instead, what we chose to do was to use the existing MOH mechanism under the National Travel Assistance, but to have the policy reviewed and any gaps identified subsequently. Mr. Speaker, this bill's had solid consultation, it's well formed and important, and I'm pleased to be a part of the committee working with this, and I commend it to the House.